It is the evening before a prominent fashion event is to be held at the Christian Haute Couture. Models run back and forth with gowns and accessories, and the place is reverberating with the excitement of the forthcoming show. All of this, however, comes to a halt when the Countess, Cristina Como, finds the body of model Isabella in the wardrobe, and nobody knows just who is to blame. As the police investigate, they find murmurs of a seeded underbelly of the fashion industry. Drug use, blackmail, backroom abortions, and corruption abound, and an investigation begins that will leave trails of bodies as clues as to who killed Isabella, and exactly what happened to her diary that detailed the corrupt nature of the fashion house, that named almost everyone who works there in it, creating a long list of varied suspects. Blood and Black Lace is a film by Mario Bava that was made in 1964 and played a big part in the evolution of the Italian horror genre Giallo, that ran primarily from 1968 to 1978, peaking between 1971 and 1973. As a movement, Giallo encapsulated the socio-economic fears that were felt by many at the time in Italy, and almost always focused on the wrongdoings of a shadowy, gloved, cloaked figure who could have been anyone, and were in a sense steeped in the paranoia that anyone could be out to hurt you. Anyone could find out that you had done something wrong in your past, and that the world was always a darker place behind its colorful, fake exterior. Literally translating to yellow, Giallo began its roots in the pulp novels published by Arnaldo Mondadori Editore, the largest publishing company in Italy, that in the 1920s started publishing Italian translations of foreign mystery writers like Agatha Christie, Edgar Wallace, John Dixon Carr, among others, with bright yellow covers. They were immensely popular at the time, and Italian filmmakers began to make their own film mysteries in the style of those novels. And so in a way, you can kind of compare the Giallo movement to that of the spaghetti westerns, that were happening roughly at the same time. They were taking ideas proposed in popular fiction of other countries and remixing them with more violence, sex, and bizarre surreal imagery and coloring. This was the norm for the Italian cinema at the time, to borrow large elements from foreign markets to make their own Italian versions of those stories, and they would be frequently extremely similar to the unauthorized source material. Some of them so similar, in fact, that in one instance, Akira Kurosawa was awarded 15% of the profits, as well as the Asian market rights to Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, after successfully suing him for ripping off Yojimbo, delaying the international release of the film for almost 4 years. And if early spaghetti westerns were primarily beholden to the samurai films of Kurosawa, then the same could be said of early Giallo films and the novels of Agatha Christie. The genre would eventually grow into its own, splitting into two subgenres focused on male and female-centric stories, but the early films like Blood and Black Lace were not unlike Christie novels such as Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile, that had a large cast of characters both male and female that each had a strong motive, and had the police at the center of the action trying to figure everything out. An element that would be expunged from the genre later, as protagonists would more commonly witness a murder and try to investigate things themselves, leaving the police out of the matter almost entirely. In 1963, Bava made the black and white film The Girl Who Knew Too Much, a riff on the Hitchcock title The Man Who Knew Too Much, and is largely considered to be the first Giallo film, although it is missing a lot of the key elements that Bava would introduce into the genre the next year in Blood and Black Lace, such as the strong focus on sexuality, color, and violence. So it should mostly be seen as a prototype of a concept that would be mastered in the follow-up. As a film on its own, and not looking at it as an important work in defining a genre, it's pretty good. The score is really fun, trumpets blare super loudly throughout most of the film, and it really feels Italian in a lot of places where the rustic scenery combines with the score in really special ways. There are a few places where you can see some pretty unforgivable mess-ups though. Like this part, where the lights dim and the killer is supposed to sink back into the shadows and disappear. But you can see an obvious cut where he got as far into the shadows as he could, and then they cut it to make it look as if he disappeared, but it's still lit pretty well, so all we see is just him literally vanish in a way that doesn't work at all, and makes him look like he has the power to teleport. And there's another section where the killer is trying to make one of the victims appear to have committed suicide, so he takes a razor and slits her wrist after she's already dead, but with it we can plainly see a gash on her wrist before the blade ever touches her. But aside from these distracting errors, the film is super cool, and I would recommend checking it out if you like detective fiction at all. The work with color here is outstanding. Each of the scenes are bathed in unnatural blues, purples, and greens that would become a staple within the Giallo genre, as well as other well-known Italian horror from this time, like Suspiria. But the main thing that the film is known for is that it was so impactful that it really created a genre unto itself, which is rare for any piece of media to be able to claim. Even though the focus would shift to being more gender-based in the future, Blood and Black Lace laid the groundwork for what all the tropes would be for an entire movement in film, and I think that's pretty cool. It popularized the look of the skin-tight masked vigilante in a dark long suit with gloves that would be used in a lot of films within the movement, that would in turn be reappropriated for American comic book characters like The Question and Watchmen's Rorschach. But more importantly than all of this, it tapped into a general feeling of paranoia that was felt at the time, and that is why it has lasted so long and was so influential. Because being the way it is, Blood and Black Lace built the idea that nothing is what it appears to be on the surface. At the beginning of the film, you are shown the pristine exterior of high society, and by the end of it, everything has fallen into chaos, and when you're allowed to look below the surface, everyone is revealed to be a fraud of who they claim to be. Men take on feminine roles, women take on masculine roles. Nobody has their lives together, everything is different, nobody knows what's going on, and the people who are oftentimes seen as the top of the world are just as lost as everybody else. Still reeling from the grips of fascism, Italy was in the midst of a confusing time where gender, sex, politics, love, fashion, and power all meant very different things than they had just 20 years previously. Everyone's roles in society had changed, and it is frequently in these times of quick societal shifts that works of art are created that elicit fear by playing off the idea that things are no longer what they once were. And that is why Blood and Black Lace was so impactful to the Italian cinema, and why it is still important to this day. It created a genre that now contains hundreds of sex-filled, vibrant, erotic murder mysteries that are iconic in their own right. And in a way, it also, along with other influences like Psycho, deeply impacted the American slasher boom of the late 70s and early 80s. Blood and Black Lace's glove-clad fingers can be felt around the neck of a lot of things that would come later in the horror genre. And even though it isn't well known by a lot of people today, major genre films like Halloween would be very different had this film not been made. And I think that's really important to see, because all art is a chain, each link a reaction to the previous one. And it's really interesting to go back and see how this film is steeped in the style of future horror, where paranoia is behind every irrational emotion-based action, where everyone could end up a killer, and the secrets that you had long thought buried are unearthed for the whole world to see.